reversible combination of oxygen with hemoglobin. Continuation. Oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve shows oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve which demonstrates a progressive increase in the percentage of hemoglobin bound with O2 as blood PO2 increases, which is called a percentage saturation of hemoglobin. Percentage saturation of hemoglobin. Nothing else but a percentage saturation of hemoglobin. Because the body leaving the lungs and entering the systemic arteries usually has a PO2 of about 95 mmHg. One can see from the dissociation curve that the usual O2 saturation of systemic arterial blood averages 97%. Conversely, in normal venous blood entering from the peripheral tissue, the PO2 is about 40 mmHg and the saturation of hemoglobin averages 75%. Maximum amount of oxygen that can combine with the hemoglobin of the blood. The blood of a normal person contains about 15 gram of hemoglobin in each 100 ml of the blood. And each gram of hemoglobin can bind with a maximum of 1.34 ml of O2. 1.39 ml when the hemoglobin is chemically pure, but impurities such as methemoglobin will be there. Methemoglobin reduce this. Therefore, 15 times 1.34 equals 20.1, which means that on average, the 15 gram of hemoglobin in 100 ml of blood can combine with a total of about 20 ml of O2 if the hemoglobin is 100% saturated. This is usually expressed as 20% volume percentage. The O2 hemoglobin dissociation curve for the normal person can also be expressed in terms of volume percentage of O2. Volume percentage of O2. The O2 hemoglobin dissociation curve for a normal person can also be expressed in terms of volume percentage of O2. Then amount of oxygen released from the hemoglobin when systemic arterial blood flows through the tissues. The total quantity of O2 bound with the hemoglobin in normal systemic arterial blood, which is 97% saturated, is about 19.4 ml per 100 ml of blood. On passing through the tissue capillaries, this amount is reduced on average to 14.4 ml. That means PO2 of 14 mmHg, 75% saturated hemoglobin. Thus, under normal conditions, about 5 ml of O2 is transported from the lungs to the tissues per each 100 ml of blood flow. 5 ml of O2 is transported from the lungs to the tissues by every 100 ml of blood flow. Transport of oxygen is markedly increased during strenuous exercise. During heavy exercise, when muscle cells use O2 in a rapid rate, which in extreme cases can cause the muscle interstitial fluid PO2 to fall from normal 40 mmHg to a low as 15 mmHg. At this low pressure, only 4.4 ml of O2 remains bound with the hemoglobin in each 100 ml of blood as shown. So, this 19.4 to 4.4 or 15 ml is the quantity of O2 actually delivered to the tissues by each 100 ml of blood flow, meaning that 3 times as much as O2 is normal is delivered in each volume of blood that passes through the tissues. Then hemoglobin buffer tissue PO2. Although hemoglobin is necessary for the transport of blood to the tissues, it performs another function essential to life. It is the function as a tissue oxygen buffer system. Tissue oxygen buffer system. Tissue oxygen buffer system. That is, the hemoglobin in the blood is mainly responsible for stabilizing the PO2 in the blood. It can be explained as follows. Hemoglobin helps maintain nearly constant PO2 in the tissue. Hemoglobin helps maintain nearly constant PO2 in the tissue. Under basal conditions, the tissue required about 5 ml of the O2 from each 100 ml of blood passing through the tissue capillaries. Referring to the O2 hemoglobin dissociation curve, one can say that the normal 5 ml of O2 to be released per 100 ml of blood flow, the PO2 must fall to about 40 mmHg. Therefore, the tissue PO2 normally cannot rise above this 40 mmHg, because if it had, the amount of O2 needed by the tissues would not be released from the hemoglobin. In this way, the hemoglobin normally sets an upper limit on the PO2 in the tissue at about 40 mmHg. Conversely, during heavy exercise, extra amounts of O2, as much as 20 times normal, must be delivered from the hemoglobin to the tissue. However, this delivery of extra O2 can be achieved with a little further decrease in tissue PO2 because of one steep slope of the dissociation curve and increase in tissue blood flow caused by the decreased PO2. That is, a very small fall in PO2 causes large amount of extra O2 to be released from the hemoglobin. It can be seen then that the hemoglobin in the blood automatically delivers O2 to the tissues at a pressure which is held rather tightly between about 15 and 40 mmHg. An atmospheric oxygen concentration changes markedly. The buffer effect of hemoglobin still maintains. Buffer effect of hemoglobin still maintains at most constant tissue PO2. The normal PO2 in the alveoli is about 104 mmHg, but as one ascends a mountain or ascends in an airplane, the PO2 can easily fall to less than half its amount. Alternatively, when one enters areas of compressed air such as deep in sea or in pressurized chambers, the PO2 may rise to 10 times this level. Even so, the pressure of tissue PO2 changes little. It can be seen from this curve that when the alveolar PO2 is decreased to as low as 60 mmHg, the arterial hemoglobin is still 89% saturated with O2, only 8% below the normal saturation of 97%. Further, the tissue still removes about 5 ml of O2 from 100 ml of blood passing through the tissues to remove this O2, and the PO2 of the venous blood falls to 35 mmHg, only 5 mmHg below the normal value of 40 mmHg. Thus, the tissue PO2 hardly changes despite the marked fall in alveolar PO2 from 104 to 60 mmHg. Conversely, when the alveolar PO2 rises as high as 500 mmHg, 500 mmHg, the maximum O2 saturation of hemoglobin can never rise above 100%, that is only 3% above the normal level of 97%. Consequently, the level of alveolar O2 may vary greatly from 60 to more than 500 mmHg PO2, and still the PO2 in the peripheral tissue does not vary more than a few milliliters from normal, demonstrating beautifully the tissue oxygen buffer function of the blood hemoglobin system. Peripheral tissues. PO2 in the peripheral tissues will not vary more than a few milliliters from normal. Factors that shift the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve, their importance for oxygen transport. The O2 hemoglobin dissociation curve are for normal average blood. However, several factors can displace the dissociation curve in one direction or the other in the manner. So this O2 hemoglobin dissociation curve shifts on average about 50% of the right. Conversely, an increase in pH from the normal 7.4 to 7.6 shifts the curve in a similar amount to the left. The Bohr effect. Increased delivery of oxygen to the tissues when carbon dioxide and hydrogen ions shift the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. A shift of the O2 hemoglobin dissociation curve to the right in response to the increase in the blood CO2 and hydrogen ion has a significant effect of enhancing the release of O2 from the blood in the tissues and enhancing oxygenation of the blood in the lungs. This is called the Bohr effect, which can be explained as follows. As the blood passes through the tissues, CO2 diffuses from the tissue cells into the blood. This diffusion increases the blood PO2, which in turn raises the blood carbonic acid H2CO3, and the hydrogen ion concentration. This effect shifts the O2 hemoglobin dissociation curve to the right and downward, so forcing O2 away from the hemoglobin and therefore delivering increased amounts of O2 in the tissues. Exactly the opposite effect occurs in lungs, where CO2 diffuses from blood into the alveoli. It reduces the blood PO2 and decreases the hydrogen ion concentration, shifting the PO2 and decrease the hydrogen ion concentration, shifting the O2 hemoglobin dissociation curve to the left and upward. Therefore, the quantity of O2 that binds with hemoglobin at any given alveolar PO2 becomes considerably increased, thus allowing greater O2 transport to the tissues. An effect of BPG to cause rightward shift of the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. The normal 2,3 biphosphoglycerate 2,3 biphosphoglycerate or BPG is in the blood keeps the O2 hemoglobin dissociation curve shifted slightly to the right all the time. In hypoxic conditions that last longer than a few hours, the quantity of BPG in the blood increases considerably, thus shifting the O2 hemoglobin dissociation curve even further to the right. This causes O2 to be released to the tissues at as much as 110 mmHg higher tissue per O2 pressure than would be the case without this increased BPG. Therefore, under some conditions, the BPG mechanism can be important for adaptation to hypoxia, especially to hypoxia caused by poor tissue blood flow. The rightward shift of the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve during exercise. During exercise, several factors shift the dissociation curve considerably to the right, thus delivering extra amounts of O2 to the active exercising muscle fibers. Extra amounts of O2 to the active exercising muscle fibers. The exercising muscles in turn release large quantities of CO2. These are several other acids released by the muscles increase the hydrogen ion concentration in the muscle capillary blood. In addition, the temperature of the muscle often rises 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, which can increase O2 delivery to the muscle fibers even more. All these factors act together to shift the O2 hemoglobin dissociation curve of the muscle capillary blood considerably to the right. This rightward shift of the curve forces O2 to be released from the blood hemoglobin to the muscle at PO2 levels as high as 40 mmHg. Even when 70% of O2 has already been removed from the hemoglobin, then in the lungs, the shift occurs in the opposite direction, allowing the pickup of extra amounts of O2 from the alveoli. Hypoxia and oxygen therapy. Almost any of the conditions discussed in the past few sections of this chapter can cause severe degree of cellular hypoxia throughout the body. Sometimes O2 therapy is of great extra value. O2 therapy. Other times it is of moderate value, and still other times it is of almost no value. Therefore, it is important to understand the different types of hypoxia. Different types. We will discuss the physiological principles of O2 therapy. The following is a descriptive classification of the causes of hypoxia: inadequate oxygenation of the blood in lungs because of extrinsic factors, deficiency of O2 in atmosphere, hypoventilation, neuromuscular disorders. Then pulmonary disease, hypoventilation caused by increased airway resistance or decreased pulmonary compliance. Then classification of hypoxia. Hypoxic hypoxia, low atmospheric and alveolar oxygen content. Classification of hypoxia. Hypoxic hypoxia, that means low atmospheric and alveolar oxygen content, impairment of diffusion across the respiratory membrane, venous to arterial shunts, ventilation, perfusion mismatches. Anemic hypoxia, next type, anemia or abnormal high hemoglobin, poisoning by carbon monoxide, stagnant hypoxia. General circulatory deficiency, localized circulatory deficiency, that means peripheral, cerebral and coronary vessels, tissue edema. Then histotoxic hypoxia, poisoning of cellular oxidation enzymes, then diminished cellular metabolic capacity for using oxygen because of toxicity, vitamin deficiency or other factors. So pulmonary disease, hypoventilation caused by increased airway resistance or decreased pulmonary compliance, abnormal alveolar ventilation perfusion ratio, including either increased physiological dead space or increased physiological shunt. Then diminished respiratory membrane diffusion, venous to arterial shunts, right to left cardiac shunts, inadequate O2 transport to the tissue by the blood, anemia. So then abnormal alveolar ventilation perfusion ratio, including either increased physiological dead space or increased physiological shunt. Then diminished respiratory membrane diffusion, venous to arterial shunts, right to left cardiac shunts, inadequate O2 transport to the tissues by the blood, anemia or abnormal hemoglobin, general circulatory deficiency, localized circulatory deficiency, that means peripheral, cerebral and coronary vessels, and tissue edema, inadequate tissue compatibility of using O2, poisoning of cellular oxidation enzymes, diminished cellular metabolic capacity for using O2 because of toxicity, vitamin deficiency or other factors. This classification of the types of hypoxia is mainly self-evident from the discussions made earlier. Only one type of hypoxia is the classification needs further elaboration. The hypoxia caused by inadequate capability of bodies, tissues, cells to use oxygen. Inadequate tissue compatibility to use oxygen. The classic cause of inability to tissue to use O2 is cyanide poisoning. In which the action of enzyme cytochrome oxidase is completely blocked by the cyanide to such an extent that the tissue simply cannot use O2 even when the plenty is available. Also, deficiencies of some of the tissue cellular oxidative enzymes or the other elements and the tissue oxidative system can lead to this type of hypoxia. A typical example or special example occurs in this disease is a beriberi disease, in which I'm not sure about the pronunciation, in which several important steps in tissue utilization of O2 and formation of CO2 are compromised because of vitamin B deficiency. കാരണമാണ് ഇത് ഉണ്ടാവുന്നത്. Vitamin B deficiency is the main cause of this particular disease. So effects of hypoxia on the body. Hypoxia, if severe enough, can cause death of cells throughout the body, but is less severe degrees. It causes principally depressed mental activity, sometimes culminating in coma. Depressed mental activity, sometimes culminating in coma, and reduced work capability of the muscles. The effects are specifically discussed. So, oxygen therapy in different types of hypoxia. Oxygen can be administered by placing the patient's head in a tent that contains air fortified with O2, allowing the patient to breathe either pure O2 or high concentrations of O2 from a mask, or administrating O2 through an intranasal tube. Recalling the basic intranasal tube by oxygen. So, recalling the basic physiological principles of the different types of hypoxia, one can readily decide when O2 therapy will be of value, and if so, how valuable. In atmospheric hypoxia, O2 therapy can completely correct the depressed O2 level in the inspired gases and therefore provide 100% effective therapy. In hypoventilation hypoxia, a person breathing 100% O2 can move 5 times as much as O2 to the alveoli with each breath as when breathing normal air. Therefore, here again, O2 therapy can be extremely beneficial. However, this provides no benefit for the excess of blood O2. CO2 also caused by the hypoventilation. In hypoxia caused by impaired alveolar membrane diffusion, especially the same result occur in the hypoventilation hypoxia, because O2 therapy can increase the PO2 in the lung alveoli from normal value of about 100 mmHg to a high as 600 mmHg. This raises the O2 pressure gradient for diffusion of O2 from the alveoli to the blood from the normal value of 60 mmHg as high as 560 mmHg, an increase in more than 800%. This highly beneficial effect of O2 therapy is diffusion hypoxia is demonstrated. So, the hypoxia caused by anemia, abnormal hemoglobin transport of O2, circulatory deficiency, or physiological shunt. O2 therapy is of much less value because normal O2 is already available in the alveoli. The problem instead is that one or more of the mechanisms for transporting O2 from the lungs to the tissues are deficient. Even so, a small amount of extra O2, between 7 and 13%, can be transported in the dissolved state in the blood when alveolar O2 is increased to the maximum, even though the amount transported by the hemoglobin is hardly altered. This small amount of extra O2 may be difference between life and death. In the different types of hypoxia caused by inadequate tissue use of O2, there is abnormally neither of O2 picked up by the lungs nor the transport to the tissues. Instead, the tissue metabolic enzyme system is simply incapable of using the O2 that is delivered. Therefore, O2 therapy provides no measurable benefit here. Thank you for listening.